I was speaking in a little town called New York City last fall. And I said, hey y'all, I'm James Farmer. And someone immediately raised their hand and said, is that your real name? And I said, it is. I wouldn't make up a name like that if I was going to make up a name. But at least it says that's my name on my belt. And y'all know how it is being Southern. We like everything monogrammed. And my belt notwithstanding. My grandfather is a Baptist minister, and so sometimes I walk in the preacher stance where I walk back and forth. And so I have to, he always told me to be sure that you greet everyone at some point with your eyes while you're preaching. I hope this isn't more of a sermon, it's more of just fun and get to learn something. But I graduated from Auburn in 2004. I'm a third generation of my family to do so. Granddaddy said I could go wherever I wanted to go, but he would send a check to Auburn. And so instead of having the Granddaddy building, I'm now the first of my generation to go, and 6 of us have already graduated from Auburn out of my generation. So we're real tickled to be from here. But one thing that I loved is that while I was in school here, I was taking classes in the same college that Granddaddy graduated from. He graduated from the College of Agriculture. And what he told me is he said we all had a double major, but we had farming as our background, or farming as our backfall. Because if we couldn't make it as an attorney or a preacher or a doctor or whatever you were going to become, you could always go back and farm. Well, thankfully, we didn't have to go back and farm. And then Farmer being my surname, that's how we got our name somewhere down the line. My father is a physician, and he reminds me a lot of Atticus Finch, because growing up, we would have people leave crops and products on our porch in exchange maybe for something my dad had done for them. And I love that opportunity to kind of be raised knowing where my food is from, knowing where just the food really came to the table. There's a bumper sticker that floats around Middle Georgia that'll say, "Who's your farmer?" And I love that because I always knew where my food came from. When I was here at Auburn, I lived with some guys who were from Atlanta. And one day, I just kind of got irritated with them, and I said, "You boys are from Marietta. Y'all aren't from Atlanta." And they said, "Well, you're from Kathleen. You're not from Perry." And I said, "Okay, touche to that." Kathleen is a boomerang-shaped zip code that touches Fort Valley, Hawkinsville, Perry, and Warner Robins. So if I'm with my Fort Valley people, I'm from Fort Valley. If I'm with my Hawkinsville people, I'm from Hawkinsville, so on and so forth. But I went to school in Perry, grew up in Hawkinsville, but went to church and go to church in Warner Robins. So it all kind of depends on where it is. So they had right to poke fun at me when I had to round up to Perry. But when I was in school, it hit me. It hit me kind of hard that my generation didn't know some of the benefits that my grandparents' generation had, of not only knowing where your food came from, but also some of the great Southern traditions of farm-to-table or garden-to-table production. They didn't know some of just the elegance of the Southern lifestyle. I'll try to stay away from those. My friends and contemporaries here at Auburn grew up where oftentimes the family dinner may be takeout, and it was that 4, 5, 6 nights a week. Well, for us, there wasn't a restaurant until we got to Macon. So we had to eat a lot of times at the dinner table. And that's really where so much of the family living came to be. So I started a supper club when I was in Auburn, and the guys would cook and the girls would clean up, or the girls would cook and the guys would clean up. We took turns. Well, that lasted all about 2 times. James ended up cooking every single time. James ended up cleaning every time and setting the table. But one day I was in the kitchen, and I was frying chicken. And I'd soaked the chicken in buttermilk, and I'd put some basil leaves in the buttermilk and kind of macerated them to get that essence into the milk. And I had some lady peas going. I had some okra and tomatoes on the stove and some cornbread. And my roommate walked in. We lived in an old house on DeBarber Street. It's not there anymore. And we called it the UBD, the Ugly Brick Duplex. He walks in, and he's on his cell phone. He goes, "Mama, this country hick is frying chicken." The next thing I know, I have his phone cradled between my ear and shoulder, and I'm saying, well, Miss Gail, if you soak the chicken in buttermilk for at least an hour beforehand, it's going to be so... I'm 19 years old telling a 50-year-old woman how to fry chicken. And I thought, what's wrong with this situation? This should be the other way around. And that was a part of the aha moment of, I need to teach these kids. So she told me, she said, James, if you will teach my son how to cook, I'll do your laundry the rest of your college career. So whenever I came home for the weekends, Mama would say, you never have dirty clothes, son. I said, well, I send them to Atlanta to be done. But I'll tell you this, just this week, I talked to this buddy of mine from Auburn, and his wife thanked me and said, do you know what? Thank you for teaching him how to cook, because I don't have to do it as much. But I love that, because I taught him some things about putting up and knowing what's in season, but it's how I grew up, how I learned. My launch pad for my career became a garden in Macon. Macon is really the next town up from us, and this garden is a beautiful place, owned by a beautiful couple who felt like the garden, the bones were there, the structure was there, it just needed to be revamped. So I met these people down at Sea Island, which is a very special place for me. Being from Georgia, we go down to the Georgia coast. And so spring break, freshman year at Auburn, I took a bunch of buddies down to Sea Island, and we got down there late at night, and the next morning, one of the guys came back, he said, I looked all over and I couldn't find the beach. And I said, that's it. He said, that brown pond? And I said, that's the Atlantic Ocean. And he was used to the white sand of the Gulf and that beautiful water that the Georgia coast doesn't have. But what I told him was that's an ocean forest. That's where things like the Ocmulgee and the Altamaha and the Savannah Rivers, the St. Mary's, they all dump into, they run through my neck of the woods. They run through silt and loam and clay, carrying all kinds of things down to the coast, and we have such a rich wildlife and flora and fauna culture down there. So I got to introduce them to the Georgia coast, but there on Sea Island, and that connection between the Georgia coast and here also leads to another Auburn connection. My parents hired an architecture firm from Moultrie, Georgia, named McCall, Turner and Associates, and Mr. Frank McCall designed a home for my parents. Mr. McCall went to Auburn, and he was one of just the preeminent South Georgia architects, but lived in a little town called Moultrie, very similar to Perry or Hawkinsville. And he was sought out by clients all over the South. They came to him from Atlanta and from Birmingham, and they would from Florida or the Georgia coast and the Carolinas. And Mr. McCall kind of had a triangle where he worked across South Georgia, the Georgia coast, and Highlands and Cashers. And I thought, you know what? This man's smart, because no one needs to be in South Georgia in the summertime. They need to be in Highlands or Cashers. It's just too hot. But Mr. McCall taught me something. He was showing my parents some plans, and he was talking about the view from the dining room out into the garden, and he felt like it was better to have French doors there to open up to lead into this garden. And he was talking to my mother about what kind of rug she had, or window treatments they were doing, or what's her silver pattern. And I thought, what is this man doing? I knew what an architect did. And he told my mother, he said, Jeannie, I'm a complete designer. And it hit me. I was about 9 or 10. He said, I thought that's what I want to be. So when I got to Auburn, there wasn't a complete design major. But I kind of melded together horticulture and art history, which I had so much fun with, those two majors, well, major and minor. And so taking the hands-on approach that I love about the College of Agriculture here at Auburn, and then getting to study people like Lenotre, who designed Versailles and Fontainebleau, and Pierre-Joseph Redouté, who was one of the most incredible botanical painters of all times, or John James Audubon. And I just really wish that the museum had been here when I was in school. It would have been my favorite classroom. So taking the art of design and the practice of design and melding them together led to my business. So I do interior and garden design, and I'm so thankful for things like the garden in Macon that I got to restore. And that garden was featured in Southern Living and Traditional Home and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And then it was featured in a book called The Private Gardens of Georgia. And this book became a great success, not only in the state, but throughout the Deep South, because the gardens are beautiful, but they're full of very recognizable things. And that's what I try to do with my gardens or with my interiors, is to fill them with recognizable elements. A garden that ends in "ya," azalea, hydrangea, magnolia, forsythia, camellia, all those "ya" plants that I just love. And then also to have an interior that looks timeless, it looks perfectly classic, whether it's done today or done 50 years ago. So that's the approach that I take with my design career. And all of it's based very similar to Mr. McCall. When the Private Gardens of Georgia came out, I got to work with the publisher, who is Gibbs Smith Publishing, and they're out of Layton, Utah. Couldn't be any further from the Deep South. But they have published beautiful books like Scalamandre's book, and Betty Lou Phillips, and Charles Fauдрé, and then this Private Gardens of Georgia. So I knew if I ever wrote a book, that's who I wanted to publish the book. In fact, I just got an email this week because I have a cookbook coming out not this time next year. This is a Time to Plant, is this book that I have here tonight. I have 2 books out this spring called Sip and Savor, which is about drinks, and then another book called Porch Living, which is about porch living. And then I have a book this fall about wreaths for all season, that'll be out. And then A Time to Cook. Well, the only problem I've had with a publisher in Utah are things like this. She emailed me and she said, "James, I don't understand this line. You're quoting your Meemaw, who was my great-grandmother. And Meemaw always said, 'There's never an old barn a little paint didn't hurt.'" Well, she used that in makeup application, meaning her lipstick. She was the old barn. But I use it daily. If I walk into a client's house and I think the living room looks great, but maybe just a fresh paint job may cure it, and there's never an old barn a little paint couldn't hurt. So my editor emails me, she says, "I don't understand what this means." And I said, "Print it, because there's a major portion of the country who does." So as I'm writing these books, The Private Gardens of Georgia came out, and Gibbs Smith asked me if I had ever thought about a book. And immediately, I gave him a manuscript. They said, "Obviously you have." And I said, "Because my generation, I felt, needed a teacher. They need someone from their peerage to say, 'Hey y'all, you can plant this, you can grow this, you can cook this, you can set the table,' but also to reconnect with my grandparents' generation and to kind of bridge the gap." I wanted my book to be up there with like Edith Wharton's diary, Country Diary of an Edwardian Lady, or some of the great books, maybe that Miss Polly Corn or some of the great old garden writers had written. I wanted it to be a classic upon publication. So they said, "Okay, James, we'll do the book. We'll print a few of them." And I told them, I said, "Y'all are not going to print more than this?" And they said, "James," they said, "this is a big number." They were printing about 7,500 books to begin with. And I said, "Y'all don't understand." I said, "That's probably going to cover my church group, but outside of that..." And they said, "James, well, Barnes & Noble has only ordered 1,000 copies of the book." And I said, "I probably won't sell a single book at a Barnes & Noble, but I'll go to a museum or to a garden club or to a ladies' Christian quilting circle in Dothan, and I will sell a whole lot of books." There are store owners here who know that we ran out. They had to do an emergency second printing. And I was so thrilled. My book hit #2 on the Wall Street Journal best-selling book, garden book this fall. And the publishers were so impressed because it was me connecting with the people saying, "Hey y'all, here's my book, here I am. Now let's talk about Mimi's recipes, Mimi's apple cake on page 189. And people got that. The South understood it and received it and welcomed it. So I got to do a whole national book tour, which was just an absolute blast, and there'll be stories from it. I've got some pictures too that I'll just flip through and show you some little bit of my work. But I love to have a conversation with people. I love to, so if you see a picture or have a question, I can tell you where the gardens are and have fun with that. But if y'all see this very first slide is very special to me because it's an Auburn project. It's my logo. We had to do a project for a design class where we designed a logo for our business. And I'm James T. Farmer III, and so my 3 initials, the J, the T, and the F, and the Roman numeral 3 are there. And then Grenade is my mother's maiden name, so the pomegranates are there, which is from her crest, and then the farm tools are from the farmer crest. Well, someone said, "You're from a mighty fine family if you have crest." I'm like, "Y'all, we're fruits and farmers. I mean, we're not too fine." But I love taking that because that became mine. It became my logo. But also what I love is the ability to make it very personal. Immediately, whether it's on a newsletter or an invoice or just stamped on my stationery, immediately you know a little bit about who I am, which I think is so Southern. So I'm going to show you a few pictures, tell you a few fun stories, and hopefully you may even be educated on something here or there. Did that move the plant? Does that help? Y'all, all these beautiful plants King let me borrow from Blooming Colors, and I have a funny story about these geraniums, and you have the calibrachoa and the shrimp plant. My mother, that's her favorite color, and I've really come to love it too. And my mother was working with this interior designer from Atlanta, and she came down to Hawkinsville, and we all know the book Out of Africa. It says, I had a farm in Africa. Well, I had a farm in Hawkinsville. And this is where I learned so much. So Mama's working with this designer from Atlanta, and Mama said, I love Carl. Carl just makes me happy. When I look at Carl, I just smile. If I could have anything in the world, it would just be Carl every day. And this designer said, Jeannie, your husband's name is Ted. Who is Carl? And Mama said, oh, I don't know anyone named Carl. I'm talking about that color. And it's this color in between salmon and peach and pink, and it's got these. I love that color too. So I have these Carl geraniums and shrimp plant and calibrachoa in homage to Mama. But I love that too. You got it. Just looks so good with green. And another plant I have up here is agarista, which is a funny Auburn, Georgia story. When I got to Auburn and started my horticulture classes, so many of my professors had to re-teach me what I knew as maybe a Georgiaism, because I have this agarista up here, which grows all up and down the river, and I cut it all the time and use it for parties and weddings. It's one of the best cut greeneries you can have. It lasts forever. And it's these plants kind of either side. Ooh, here. Well, we were taken up in one of Dr. Ponder's classes, and I wrote down Agarista papifolia, and I got it marked incorrect because it was technically Leucothoea papifolia. And I said, technically it is that in Alabama, but in Georgia we call it Agarista. And I even went back to a book that I had from the University of Georgia Press, and I ended up petitioning that, 2 points I got counted off on that quiz, because I told Dr. Ponder, I said, we call it Agarista on the farm. And I say liriope, not liriope or liriope, and camellia and hydrangea. So there's some Georgia things. So I asked my professors, don't count off with the way I say it, just because of where I'm from. But anyway, so these are some of those plants and some of the things that are special to me and representative of that. I'll show y'all just a glance of some pictures. There's another television here, and if you want to go back and see. But the pictures are worth 1,000 words, and some of those 1,000 words are funny stories. This, which you can see a little bit, is a huge flower arrangement I did for clients in Nashville. And one thing that's a lot of fun in my job is I get to help clients with parties. Oftentimes we call them farmer parties, and it's where they will invite 8 or 10 and couples and maybe however many people you can see at your dining table. And we go through your sideboard and through your china cupboard, and we pick out some things that you haven't used in a long time. And we set a beautiful table. Well, this is a house that Richard Keith Langham did the interiors, and McAlpin Tankersley had done the architecture. And at this party was going to be people like Julia Reed and Ben Page and Bobby McAlpin and all these incredible people in the design world. So for me to be able to do the flowers for this party, I was just really, really honored. So my client came downstairs and she said, James, it is absolutely appalling. And I said, meaning to drop dead for appalling? And she said, no, like a pall. It reminds me of a funeral pall for a casket. And I said, okay. And she said, well, I'll tell you what. Instead of taking it apart, we'll just not serve off the table. We'll have the hors d'oeuvres pass. And I said, okay. But what it did was, this is a large home. And I told her, I said, your home to do flowers in every single room would take a week. But in this case, it's concentrated into one room, and it's one big bang. And she loved it. I had mirrors cut to match the top of her dining room table. And these mirrors reflect the candlelight and the flowers. Well, it was during the Nashville Antiques and Garden Show, and it was one of those weeks that you have in the Deep South where one day it snowed and then the next day it was 80 degrees. And she also said, James, I have one more question about this arrangement. And I said, yes, ma'am. She said, where on earth did you get all that forsythia? And I said, your neighbor used to have a great big bush. This is a little bit about where I'm from. You see, I'm a sucker for white painted brick and Chippendale railing. It's Southern, it's classic, it works. This is the last home that Mr. McCall designed before he passed away, and it's some dear friends of mine in Hawkinsville. And so just a little close-up of it. But I love the ability to take something that's classic and Southern and say it was good when it was built a long time ago, and it's still good today. Another great Southern classic vernacular. This home is in Madison, Georgia, and if y'all have never been to Madison, it's one of the jewels of the South. Mr. Sherman did not burn it en route to Savannah, so this house dates back to the 18th century. So being the art history nut that I am, I love the moldings and the details in this home. These clients also have a home up on up in Highlands, and so they get to see kind of the best of all the seasons. And this was a party for their grandson. It was a wedding reception, so we did all green and white for the plantings. Kind of a close-up. I found these two old lions at an antique store, and I love calling a client and saying, guess what I found? Sometimes it's just the right thing you need. A little bit of the Macon garden, but what I love to use is I love to use things that are indigenous to the area. These are old Georgia red bricks. You also have Alabama red bricks that are made from the clay of that state, and I love using that color. Here they are underneath the loggia of this home, and I love the big flower arrangement. It's nothing but azaleas and viburnum and palmetto fronds, and it just works. It's classic, it's clean, and green and white. Using things like, I used old bricks from the Bid paving company in Macon and used those for the sidewalks. And I love color. You can see the Carl Dianthus down there too. Here's this garden in Macon, and I love to take foxgloves and delphinium, and a lot of these you can see in the book too, but I tell people that yes, you can grow foxgloves in the Deep South, and there's so much that you can do in a southern garden. It's all about planning the planting before you've even put the spade in the ground. And I love to share with people things like the May rule, which if it blooms before May, the azaleas and the spireas and the forsythias and the camellias, the things that bloom before May, prune them, trim them while they're blooming or immediately after. If it blooms after May, crepe myrtle and hydrangea or vitex and Confederate rose and all the summer blooming roses coming back during dormancy. And the May rule is just kind of those classic Southern rules, and I'll tell you a funny May rule story upon conclusion. Down on the Georgia coast, a home at Sea Island that I did the garden design for, sometimes you need to make a statement, sometimes you need to make an entrance for a garden home, but sometimes the Almighty Himself has done the work. And so this is just a view onto the ocean, and just use two palms to frame the view. And then there's from the ocean side looking back onto the home. That home was built the same year that the Cloister Hotel was built, and then was renovated the same year the new hotel was built. I love color. I love to mix color, but I also love color to be double purpose. Here I use zinnias. I love the cut and come again mixes, and these mixes are so lovely because you literally cut them and cut them and cut them, and the more you cut them, the more they bloom. And there's just a roundabout way to get to the front door. Rather than just point A to point B, a straight shot, we have a courtyard to walk through to get to the front. Using things like these big granite monoliths, to use big stones. These are all hitching posts. And to think of the horses and the carriages that have been hitched to them at times, I used them here to be the entrance markers for a home in Macon. Here's the garden in Macon in full bloom with tulips. Keep them in the refrigerator through Thanksgiving and plant them that week, and they will do so well. I love the double late flowering varieties such as Angelique. Those work so well for the Deep South. But I studied in the art history program at Auburn so many of the botanical paintings, and you can see the beautiful works of art that they are, and I love to make arrangements to mimic those paintings. Close-ups of the tulips, and light and water are major elements in a garden. A little funny story, one of my first jobs when I got home from school, there was a lady who I thought was one of the finest ladies in Perry, until she said, "James, I want a fountain, but I want a fountain that makes me have to go to the pisser." And I said, "Whoa, I wasn't expecting that," but I knew what she meant. She wanted to hear the water. Here it is. So I sometimes keep the water levels lower or higher depending on the sound that I want the water to make as it's falling. Here's the back stairs, and I love to use the curvature of the architecture is mimicked with the curvature of the stair step, of the clipped boxwood, and also of the flowers at the base of the bed. This is what I call a living arrangement. They're my favorite kind of flower arrangements to make. It's where you have basically a planted composition. In this case, I have Euchera or Euchera or coral bells are also called, potted hydrangea, potted ferns, and then I stuck fresh stems of bells of Ireland and ruscus in there for the day of the event. And it just makes a statement. This was for a friend of mine for her wedding, and she married, this girl married a buddy of mine from childhood, and she always refers to it as either mine and James's wedding or mine and David, her husband's wedding, because we had so much fun doing the flowers for her wedding. This is a garden near here in Lynette, Alabama, and I love to use the contrast of something fine like a bench, like this large bench that sets a little more of a formal tone, but set in a woodland area, so it's the one anchor part for the garden. This was a natural clearing next to the house, and so we didn't have to cut down a single tree, but it was very much just kind of a natural round area, and making it into a garden spot was fun. Here's the back of the same home, a little more formal, a little more stylized. This has my favorite mixture of Endless Summer and Nico Blue hydrangeas. They are fantastic together, and I highly recommend every southern garden to have them. The gazebo in the Macon garden. This is fall, and fall is my favorite season. I like spring. It's great. It's nice. Summer's just too hot for too long. But fall is our reward for surviving the heat. And so we get things like a garden like this for fall. And when people tour this garden, they realize that the garden isn't just a beautiful place to see. And to see it, the garden is a sensual place. It engages all the senses, in particular fall, because you see the beautiful flowers, you hear the buzzing of the hummingbirds and the bees, you smell the fragrances of so many of these amazing flowers, you can touch the different textures, and then also just the whole appeal is great for all the senses. There's the Macon garden at fall. Being an Auburn boy, I don't like to say the word crimson, but I do like the depth of red that some flowers can provide for the fall. So a deep red coleus is what's used throughout there. And I did a book signing in Tuscaloosa, and they said, just call a spade, that's a crimson coleus. I said, no, it's deep red. This garden is in Montgomery, and Montgomery's been very good to me, and I've done a lot of work in Montgomery, but the inspiration for this garden came from my sister's wedding ring. My sister inherited a diamond from an aunt, a round diamond, and then my brother-in-law did a smart thing and said, James, go with me shopping for your sister because I don't know what to get. And so we got a square setting for a round diamond, round in a square setting. So you have these four corners that have to be filled with a baguette. So when you look at the table or look down on the ring, it looks like a beautiful square diamond, but as you study it, you realize that there's 5 diamonds involved, with the round in the center and the 4 parterres, as they would be called in a garden. So this is a round diamond in a square setting with 4 parterres around it. It's beautiful to look down and upon. I had to take calculus 3 times at Auburn, but geometry, I got easy. It shapes, it worked. I did not do well in math. Here's back to just showing a little bit of fall and how the touch of the tropics works so well in the southern landscape. A garden in Montgomery, and light and water. I think a garden should be just as beautiful at night as it is in the daytime. And here's the garden at night. And I use a little more of a yellow light than a white light, since we use gas lanterns on the home's architecture. This was the first garden I did in Montgomery, and these 2 clients are both physicians, and they both deal with cancer all day. And when they get home, they just want to piddle. They just don't want to think about their day job, and they want to have something beautiful. So she likes her little potager or kitchen garden. He likes the larger garden, which you see on this part. And we were doing a Southern Living shoot here in this garden, and I brought my editor down, and it was early June when we first scouted the garden. And y'all know how in early June it's like the garden is on bended knee, and then all of a sudden by the end of June it has sprung and it's a jungle. Like, how did it grow that big so quick? Well, this garden seemed to have grown exponentially. And I asked the homeowners, I said, Don, what's up? The garden has grown, but has grown tenfold. He goes, James, we discovered those Miracle-Gro wands, and we'll buy all of them that Lowe's have. And we'll just stand there. The next thing you know, 2 hours have gone by, and I've just stood there, and I've watered, and then I'll just move, and then I'll do the next bed for the next 2 hours. So this is a garden on steroids, basically, is what it is. He said, I have to deal with radiation and chemotherapy all day. It's just so much fun to watch a salvia become 10 feet tall. And this is my aunt and uncle's home that's on my family land in Perry. And the home blends in with the landscape. It's on the cover of my book. But when I was at Auburn when my aunt and uncle were building this home, and Aunt Kathy called me and said, all right, it's time to pick out the paint color for the brick. That's something about being Southern, that you build a beautiful brick home, then you paint it. So I said, Aunt Kathy, you need to paint the home water oak gray. And she said, well, what number is that on the Benjamin Moore chart? And I said, it's not. It's water oak gray. I said, take a piece of bark into Connor's Paint downtown and they'll match it. I've taken leaves and petals and twigs and rocks and stones to match. And then for the shutters, pine needle green. Well, when I was in kindergarten, I got in trouble for 2 things. One, I ate the birdseed peanut butter mixture when we were making the pine cone bird feeders. If you put it in peanut butter, I'll eat it. But second off, I talked back to my kindergarten teacher, and I'm a pretty nice kid, but she got on to me because we were coloring one day, and she said, James, tree bark isn't gray, it's brown. Well, the land that I grew up on, the tree bark's gray. You think about water oaks and sycamores and all the different colored shades of grays and browns and taupe that tree bark is. And I said, yes, ma'am, it is gray. And I had to sit in the corner for talking back to my teacher. Well, she came to a book signing and she said, James, if I'd only known. I told her I took all that repressed angst from kindergarten and put it into my writing. But the home blends in with the surroundings, and I love to have that. But as I've gone around the country and talked to groups, I've been able to talk to museums and garden clubs and all kinds of neat opportunities. There's been some connections that have resounded, whether I've been in Memphis or Miami or Dallas or New York. I've had so many fun opportunities. But when I was in New York, and I have had to do some research on this story to make sure it's true, and it is. But this lady came up to me. There's a fabulous couple in New York named Al Roker and Deborah Roberts. And Al Roker is on that morning show that NBC has, and the Today Show. And then Deborah Roberts is on ABC. And Deborah is from Perry. And she always gets on to me. She said, James, you're really from Kathleen. I said, okay, I understand. But Deborah asked if she and Al could host a book party for me in New York. Well, like Brer Rabbit in the Briar Patch, please don't throw me in the Briar Patch. Please don't throw a New York book party for me, Deborah Roberts and Al Roker. I mean, come on, how much fun can that be? So about a week before the party, Deborah called me, and she said, hey, can't talk. I'll tell you the story when you're in the city next week, but I had to move the venue for the party. She said, it's now going to be, rather than at our home, it's going to be at the corner bookstore, which is on the corner of Madison and 94th. If you've seen You've Got Mail, you've seen this bookstore. And I said, well, that's fine, Deborah, that's fine. And she said, well, I had to do something that I hardly ever have to do to get my way in New York. But I did it. I'll tell you about it. I'll tell you about it next week. And I said, okay. And I'm just puzzled because I was real excited about having the party at Deborah and Al's home, and it was just going to be a delightful event. They're inviting all their friends. So the next week, I'm sitting at Fred's restaurant at Barney's, eating French fries with Deborah Roberts, because you can take us out of house and county, but we're still going to eat French fries wherever we go. Dipping French fries in mayonnaise, and we're just so tickled because here we can order anything in New York, but we're ordering fried food and mayonnaise. And I said, Deborah, everyone in this restaurant is staring at us. I said, how do you deal with it? I mean, because she's a very well-known celebrity, and she goes, well, James, they think I look like Michelle Obama. That's what it is. So they think, who is this kid eating with Michelle Obama? And I said, no, they know who you are. And I said, now tell me the story about why the venue changed for the book party. And she said, James, we had a pipe burst, and our whole first floor flooded at their townhouse on the Upper East Side. And the floors were not through, and I didn't want 100 people traipsing in across construction, so we moved it to the corner bookstore. So I walked into the corner bookstore, and I asked the man there at the counter, I said, sir, I'd like to host a party for my friend. He's an author, and I think a bookstore would be a good venue. The man looked at her in the polite way that New Yorkers can be and said, no. And she said, well, why not? And he said, well, because we only support Carnegie Hill, New York authors, and I don't know of a Carnegie Hill author who has a new book out. And she said, well, he is a new author. He is from my hometown. And Deborah said, this man was just impassable. He just kept saying no. So Deborah said, James, I did something that I rarely ever do to get my way. And I said, you said, I'm Deborah Roberts and I'm on ABC News. And she said, no. I said, you told him that you're Al Roker's wife? No. I said, you said that Oprah is your best friend? Because she is. And she said, no. She said, I just leaned across the counter. I grabbed his hand and I said, honey, let me talk to you about this one more time. I want to host a book party for my friend from my hometown. Did I mention that's Perry, Georgia? And he's going to bring petafores and pimento cheese and pralines and maybe even some tassies. The man looked at her and said, what's a tassie? And she said, James, I pulled out my southern accent because at ABC News I have to talk like I don't have an accent. And I pulled it out, and that's what you do to get your way in New York. And I said, okay. Well, we were at this party, and I was, getting to talk to all these people. And this lady came up to me, and I'd had dozens of people at this party just say, James, your book reminded me of canning with my great aunt or growing vegetables with my grandparents, and I'd forgotten about what fresh mint tastes like in tea, and on and on. And this lady came up to me and she said, hi, James, I'm from Mississippi. And I said, I know you are. For two reasons. One, her accent, but two, she just said Mississippi. She didn't say all the S's. And she goes, I've been in the city about 25 years now, so my accent's faded. But I do think it's coming back whenever I go home for a bit. I said, really? I said, I think you still got it, honey. She goes, I wanted to tell you about a friend of mine in Jackson. And so she's telling me about, I'd done a little talk, and I'd done a talk about the May rule, which I mentioned to y'all about pruning. And if you will look in Webster's, the word prune means to snip and to cultivate. It does not mean to take gash hedges and make your azalea look like a poodle. Crepe myrtles should be lightly trimmed if they are even cut at all, not crepe murdered. So I'm doing this whole lecture about the May rule, and she said, James, my friend has a man who works for her, and he taught me the May rule, and he told me all about it, and she kept saying his name, and I just couldn't catch it. I said, what? Say his name again, and she kept saying, well, Bimanish said this, and Bimanish said that, and I said, wait, why is he named that? There's got to be a story. And she said, well, that's the story. And y'all, I met the woman in Jackson. It is the truth. She said that this man had worked for this family for about 20 years, and he was the gardener of Jackson. He can make anything grow. He said you could put your finger in the soil in his garden and another one of you would grow by the next day. But he preferred to be paid in cash on Mondays so he would behave during the week rather than cash on Fridays because he would misbehave over the weekend. Well, one day this lady was out of cash and she said, Bimanish, I'm so sorry, I'm going to have to write you a check. And I don't know how to spell your name. He said, it's real easy, ma'am. It's T.R. Smith. And she said, well, where does this nickname Bimanish come from? He goes, that's something you just call me, ma'am. And she said, I'm the only person that calls you Bimanish? Yes, ma'am, when we met, I told you to go Bimanish, and you've called me that ever since. So, immediately, there are 20 years of horror on this woman's face because all of these ladies, I guarantee you, you all have the same pink bathrobe that this lady has, and she has stood on her front porch in the pink bathrobe. Bimanish, go cut those hydrangeas. Bominicious, will you take those ferns to Mama's? Bominicious, will you take the pine straw up to the church for me? So this lady calls her daughter at Ole Miss, and she says, you're not going to believe what Bominicious' real name is. And the girl says, Mom, it's T.R. And she said, well, why did you let me call that? I just thought that was something special the two of you had. But I'm glad to know that the May rule really is a cardinal rule that people do remember it. But anyways, my book tour has taken me all over the country, and I'm doing some neat things besides just speaking. I'm doing some filming and the other books that are out, so y'all keep your fingers crossed that some of the filming things go well. I'm really, really blessed to do what I love. My parents gave me what I feel like is one of the very best gifts a parent can give a child, and that is that they completely loved and unconditionally supported my passion. They saw early on when I was hovering over my Bahia grass hut in left field during T-ball, protecting it from the ball. Daddy was like, he's not an athlete, all right. I didn't know what cash was until I got to Auburn, because everywhere I went at home, I just charged it. And the bill went to Daddy's office. But I loved the idea that I could take a little bit of what I knew and had an experience growing up, write about it. You can see it on my blog, jamesfarmer.com. You can go to my website and see that, and it'll link you to my blog. But I love the opportunity just to say, you can grow it, you can cut it, you can arrange it, you can make a beautiful lifestyle just from the garden and garden living. So that's the subtitle of the book, is Southern Style Garden Living. We've got it in the bookstore, and I'll be glad to sign it, but hope to get to talk to y'all some more. And if you want to see more of the pictures, they'll be up here as well. But I do like to have a conversation, so are there any questions or comments or concerns about anything? Don't ask me too many Latin names, because that could be a bad one. But I do have a lot of fun with what I'm doing, and it comes down to being a true blessing in that. But thank y'all very, very much for letting me be a part, and I hope to get to talk to you all some more.